If one person kills, he's obviously a murderer. But what if two people kill together? Like, what if two people just push somebody off a cliff together? Are they each held liable for one murder? Does the murder just split between them and one is liable for half a murder and one is liable for the other half of the murder, and so then they wouldn't be liable to capital punishment? Or what if there's 10 people and all of them join into the murder? Are all of them liable or all of them guilty? In this video, we understand who is held liable when it comes to partners in murder. And of course, we're going to do so according to the Noahide Code, which is God's law for all humanity. To best understand how God wants non-Jews to treat accomplices in murder, I think it is best to first look at the difference between the murder commandment for non-Jews and the murder commandment for Jews, because through it we'll identify an important difference that is relevant for accomplices in murder. As many of us know, after the Great Flood, God prohibits murder for Noah and all of his future descendants that come after him. He says, "Whoever spills the blood of man, by man shall his blood be spilled." This verse is the main murder prohibition for all non-Jews. Later in history, though, to the Jewish nation, the descendants of Israel, God gives a general prohibition in the Ten Commandments, "Thou shalt not murder." And then later in Leviticus 24 verse 17, God gives Israel what the punishment must be for somebody who murders. He says, "A man who strikes all of the soul of a person, he shall be put to death." Now there's an important relevant difference here between the command for non-Jews and the command for Jews. The Jewish command says that one is only liable for murder if they kill the entire soul of the person, which means that a Jew is only held liable for killing a person as a murderer when he kills the entire soul himself. If he had another partner who helped him kill this person, then he didn't kill the entire soul of the person. For example, he could have killed 70% of the soul and his partner could have killed 30% of the soul. In this case, then, he would not be held liable to capital punishment for murder since he didn't kill the entire soul of the person. Of course, though, it always goes without saying that everybody is liable to God, and the courts can still choose to punish if they so see fit. Importantly, though, for us non-Jews, our verse doesn't have this intricate detail of killing the entire soul of the person. It simply says, "Whoever spills the blood of man, by man his blood shall be spilled." Importantly, it doesn't say, "Whoever spills all of the blood of a person," and therefore we understand that one does not need to spill all of the blood of a person to be held liable for murder. So in a case where two non-Jews killed one person, let's say that one spilled 70% of the blood and the other person spilled 30% of the blood, both people could potentially be held liable for murder depending on a few factors that we'll get into. But the difference here is that a Jew can never be held liable to capital punishment if they have a partner in murder. But we see for the non-Jews, non-Jews can be held liable in murder if they have another partner. But does this non-Jew who only spilled 30% of the blood, not 70% or even 100% of the blood, does this person deserve capital punishment as a full-on murderer? To understand this, let's review some principles that we've covered in other videos. In one of our first videos on murder, we covered the distinction between direct murder and indirect murder. Remember that for direct murder, somebody becomes liable to capital punishment the moment they deliver the lethal force. And for indirect murder, the person becomes liable the moment that the victim dies as a result of the situation that this person set up. These principles help us clarify situations where there are multiple people involved in the murder and they each contribute their own actions. For example, for direct murder, suppose a man punches a person with a lethal blow that will definitely kill the victim in 5 minutes. But then another person comes along and delivers a lethal blow to that victim and kills him immediately. Both people would be liable to murder because both delivered a lethal blow to the victim. An example for indirect murder is that a first person comes along, ties up a victim, and puts him in a pit, and then opens a water source so that this victim will eventually drown. If nothing else happens, this first person becomes liable to capital punishment as an indirect murderer. But if a second person comes along and opens up a second water source to kill this victim sooner, then the second person becomes liable and not the first person, since the second person took control over the situation and caused the victim to die through his process. If any of this is confusing, I encourage you to watch the video on direct versus indirect murders. But using these principles, we can easily tackle many cases where there are more than 2 people involved. For example, if we have 10 people who are each attacking a victim, and each of them attack with a lethal blow that will certainly kill the victim, then each is held liable as a direct murderer. Since again, remember, the direct murderers become liable the moment they apply the lethal force. Now, those in the group who did not hit with a lethal blow, who did not hit with a punch that had the capacity to kill the victim on its own, these people are exempt from automatic capital punishment. But now suppose that each attacker punches the victim with a punch that is not lethal, that is not capable on its own of killing the victim. In this case, all of them are exempt except for the person who is the last person to punch the victim, who caused him to die. The person who punched this victim last is held liable to capital punishment. This is similar to the case where a second person came and opened up a second water source. Although that first person contributed to the circumstances leading to death, the final attacker, the second person, is the one who is actually held automatically liable as the murderer. And such is the case here. If none of them hit with a lethal blow, then they're all kind of like indirect punches in a way. Then the last person who's closest to the death is the one who ultimately took control over the situation and is held automatically liable. Now, of course, the question pops up. What if we don't know who hit with a lethal blow and who didn't? What if we don't know whose punch had the power to kill and whose punch didn't? This is where the rule of exemption due to doubt comes in. If we don't clearly know who hit with a lethal blow or whose punch had the power to kill, then all of the involved attackers are exempt from capital liability. And this is according to the rule of exemption due to doubt. In this case, the court is not obligated to administer the death penalty, but of course it can still punish however it sees fit. But now let's consider a different type of case. What if two people commit a single act of murder simultaneously? For example, what if two attackers push a victim off a high cliff together? Or what if they together held a victim underwater until he drowned? Who would then be liable in these cases? Up to this point, we've only been talking about cases where the attacker acts one after another. Each person had an individual act. But here, both attackers are performing the same act at the same time. In cases like these, liability depends on capability. If both attackers could have accomplished the murder through their own individual power, then both are held liable. If neither attacker could have accomplished the murder individually, alone, but only through their combined effort, then both are also held liable. But if only one attacker could do it individually on his own, then only that attacker is held automatically liable. The other attacker is treated as a mere assistant and would then be exempt. If, however, more than two attackers are involved in this single act of murder, and none of these attackers could accomplish it individually, then all are considered as mere assistants and all would be exempt from automatic capital liability. And this same basic analysis applies whether the murder was direct murder or indirect murder. For a fuller explanation of why Torah law distinguishes between these cases and why individual capability matters, I encourage you to watch this video on assistance of sin. In that video, we explain all of this and why it all makes sense. And finally, remember that all of these rules concern judgment by a human court. It's how God wants us to judge on earth. But it goes without saying that every participant remains accountable before God according to their actual involvement. And Rabbi Weiner actually notes that it's unclear whether the assistant of murder is regarded by God as severe as a person who actually commits murder on his own accord. It may not even be as severe as somebody who sends a mercenary to kill. But in any case, this is all heavenly liability, heavenly judgment. We don't need to worry about this because God judges everybody with perfect justice. We just need to know what the actual law on earth is as God wants it to be. Now let's summarize. We learned in Genesis 9 verse 6 that multiple people can be held liable for a single individual's murder. As long as they spilled blood, they can be punished. To understand who is liable, we must first ask if the murder was performed by multiple different acts by different people, or if there's just one simultaneous act of murder. If multiple attackers attack one after the other, then liability depends on who actually caused the person's death, who struck with a lethal blow. Whoever does strike with a punch that is independently capable of killing the victim, that person becomes liable. Whoever doesn't, that person's exempt. If none of the blows are independently capable of killing the victim, then the person who struck closest to the victim's death is held liable. The rest are exempt. If none of this can even be determined, then the rule of exemption due to doubt applies. All would be exempt, however, the court still can apply biblical justice. If, however, multiple attackers perform one act of murder simultaneously, then the liability depends on capability. For two attackers, if each could do it independently, each are liable. If none of them could do it independently, each are liable. If only one attacker could have committed the murder independently, then only this attacker is held liable, the other is regarded as a mere assistant and then is exempt. And if more than two of the attackers participate in the attack such that any two of them could actually perform the murder, then each is treated as an unnecessary additional participant, and all would be exempt from capital punishment. Finally, always remember that God judges every person with perfect justice, and a court may, if it so chooses, dole out punishment as it sees fit. This has been the video on accomplices of murder according to the Noahide Code. On this channel, we go into the entire Noahide legal system, so subscribe to stay tuned so you don't miss out on any videos. Thank you, as always, for watching.